Inspired by the life of the savvy and ambitious Colombian businesswoman Griselda Blanco comes a new Netflix original limited series. Griselda tells the story of a devoted mother who, with her lethal blend of charm and relentless savagery, creates one of the most powerful cartels in history. Witness Sofia Vergara's captivating transformation into the godmother of the underworld. Griselda, streaming January 25th, only on Netflix.
Join me, 48 Hours correspondent Erin Moriarty, on my podcast, My Life of Crime, as I take on true crime investigations like no other. This season, I'm looking into the labyrinth of crime and secrets within families. I'm cutting straight to the evidence and talking to the people directly involved, including investigators and the families of victims. Listen to My Life of Crime with Erin Moriarty wherever you get your podcasts.
A note to listeners, the following podcast contains content that may not be suitable for all audiences.
I believe these records were obtained under subpoena, and I think it was from the Highway Patrol when they became involved in the case. They subpoenaed phone call records or phone call activity records from AT&T for 5 phone numbers. What I noticed was that he never returns another call to them. He never returns a text. He never returns a call. And he knows that he has every indication that Colt may be seriously injured out there.
You are listening to Partners in True Crime. We are your hosts, Rob and Cindy Dorfman.
Retired Detective Division Commander for the Department of Law Enforcement of Illinois, Jodi Barth, has been part of our investigative team, and we are so lucky to have her.
Over the past few months, Jodi has taken a deep dive into all of the phone records from those fateful 2 days in early July of 2013 when Molly and Colt went missing.
Jodi is here today along with Paula Fielder to go over her analysis of the myriad of calls that were made that day from all the people that we have spoken about in this podcast.
Today we have Jodi Barth and Paula Fielder with us to go over some work that Jodi's been working on in regards to all of the phone records during the beginning of this investigation. So, Jodi, thanks for coming on. Tell us a little bit about, number one, why you thought this is so important, and number two, what do you think you found based upon your analysis of all these phone records?
Well, thanks for having me again, Rob. So why I think this is important, it was important for me, and I hope it's important for other people. But if you remember, I believe these records were obtained under subpoena, and I think it was from the Highway Patrol when they became involved in the case. They subpoenaed phone call records or phone call activity records from AT&T for 5 phone numbers. And when you get those, and we received those reports, when you get them, they're individual reports for that particular number. So they show a variety of things. So when you look at the report, to me, it's very noisy. It's very crowded. It's got a lot of numbers and a lot of lines on it. But what it shows is it will show you the originating number of the call and the terminating number of the call. It'll show you the length of the call, and it will show you also, of course, the numbers that are involved, and it will show you the call location, the towers that handled that call. So for me, it's very confusing to get any sort of pattern recognition when I'm looking at 5 different reports like that. So what I did was I took that information and I merged it into one in a chronological order so that you get a picture, a snapshot of what was occurring minute by minute from the time the records start till the time they finish.
Wow.
And so for me, I can then look at it and see, do I see any patterns? I can see who's calling who. I can see who's not calling who. We can, you can use them to corroborate statements. You can use them to conflict with statements. It just confirms a lot of things for me. Of course, you can also see the areas. So we'd like to be able to pinpoint locations, but unfortunately, apparently we can't do that yet. But we can certainly find the areas from which they're calling, and if they're traveling, which towers are picking them up, so we can get a sense of direction. So that's kind of why I did all this. It was just easier for me to get a picture of what really happened during those critical hours, those first critical hours.
Paula, we talked about the phone records from day one when we met with you, and how we feel like it's such an important factor in finding out what really went on during that time. What do you think after? I mean, I know Jodi sent you this. What do you think? Does anything look different to you based upon these records? Can you see anything that kind of stands out to you?
Yeah, I mean, what she's done here is incredible. I mean, it's a lot. I know she did a lot because I've had these phone records for a long time and I would have never thought to do this. However, I think the things that stood out to me were the calls that were being made the following morning. And so I think that is what's kind of interesting in most of this for me, because I'm all about where she was, what she's doing, and those people she was involved with, what they were doing at the time she's out there lost.
Yeah, those critical moments. Those were critical moments.
Yes.
Those phone records from the beginning, Paula and I, when we first met, we both were obsessed with the phone records. I have gone through those phone records with highlighters and little sticky papers. Since I got them, I have a box in the other room with these phone records. So that you've done all this work, Jodi, is amazing, because now it can help us paint a picture of what was going on the next day. Because for us, for Paula and I, when we were talking from the beginning, that's really the key to this, the next morning. Who was she talking to? Who were those people talking to? Because all those people were talking about the same thing.
Right, exactly. And there's something, I don't know if you picked up on this, but when you marry the call location with the calls, you can see that, first of all, we can confirm the pre-chase activity to a T. We know where they were when it all started. We can confirm when the chase is actually on. We can confirm that with what we know is from police recordings and police records. So we can confirm the time and the location where the chase ended with the wreck, and we can kind of narrow down exactly what time Con leaves the area and Molly and Colt stay in that area. And then from there, we can confirm their movements throughout the night. So they're staying in one particular area that's closest to the Jimtown Tower, but they occasionally breach into an area that the Kreiner Hills Tower picks up. So there's a little movement there. But what's really interesting to me is, one, we can confirm that after Con was made aware of the fact that Colt was allegedly seriously injured, he received several phone calls from both Con and Molly. And throughout the night, Con is
Did you mean Colt and Molly?
Colt and Molly. So Con is very good throughout the night about screening his calls. He rarely answers a call, if you've noticed that. But he checks his voicemail right after, and he calls the people back. In this particular case, and he did that with both Colt and Molly before the chase ended, before they were left out there. After he knows that Colt was allegedly seriously injured, what I noticed was that he never returns another call to them. He never returns a text. He never returns a call. And he knows that he has every indication that Colt may be seriously injured out there. But what I really found interesting was after he leaves them, he goes, I believe is he probably goes home, because he goes it stays on the Kreiner Hills frequency, and it never goes off of that throughout the night. So in any event, he stays at home throughout the night, but at 5:54 at 5:29 the next morning, he goes on the move, and he moves into that Jimtown area. And while he's doing that, there's a flurry of calls between him, Jennifer Knipp, Tim Branch, Con, and then Con makes 7 attempts to contact, all in a 20-minute period from 5:29 to 5:54 a.m. The last activity we see of him in that Jimtown area is at 5:54 a.m. on the 8th, and at 6:30 he gets a call from Jennifer, and he's back at the Kreiner Hills tower location by then solely, and he never moves off of there till when the records end later that day, almost 5 o'clock that night. So I find it interesting that for 20 minutes, he actually goes back to the same area where Molly and Colt are.
That is
that
interesting.
morning.
That is
Yeah.
interesting.
In that direction. So
In that
what
direction.
people, yeah.
What do you think about that, Paula?
Well, I think that, that's very interesting. And it also goes along with some of the things we were told in the past about things that Con was doing that morning. So him going, now the part where he went back into the general vicinity where Molly and Colt were in order to ping off the same tower that they're at, I was not aware of that. But the fact that he did that and then he came back to his home and stayed there, that is consistent with things we've been told.
I just saw it too when I did this. When I did this listing, I noticed that, and it's like, well, that's interesting, that it's obviously close by. And I thought the flurry of activity at 5:29 a.m. between all those people is just incredible to me.
Yeah, that does seem interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And then what time did Molly call her friend? Wasn't it like 6 a.m.?
6:33.
6:33. Huh.
And then the last call Molly made was 6:39, and that was the last call she ever made.
Right.
And then where does it say where that was located? I can't remember where it was located.
Yes. Yeah, that one was located in the Jimtown, I think, in the Jimtown. She and Colt are mostly in the Jimtown area, the Jimtown Tower area, but occasionally they'll venture into the Kreiner Hills line of sight tower. It's probably a line of sight where it picks it up, because it's only a few miles apart from where Con lived to where the car was left.
Mm-hmm.
And these towers, I'm actually part of what's taken me so long is I've been trying to educate myself to this whole mobile network and what these reports actually mean and the vernacular for it. And they work off of radio waves in an arc, in a circular motion, actually. Depending on your line of sight or what the geography is, you could bounce off of different towers. And I've been having to educate myself, so it's taken me a while to do that.
And I would imagine that after 10 years, those patterns have changed. They may have upgraded some of those areas. Who knows? I mean, it's down in Oklahoma. Who knows if they did or not? What are some of the other analysis that you thought were interesting, and some of the names because all these names are names in this list you said, they're all people we've talked about. They're all people that were, let alone at least part of the story, if not Did you find out anything else interesting that kind of came to the forefront?
Like I said, I was looking for patterns. So clearly, now this has already been adjudicated and everything, but we know that Sabrina reported the car stolen the following morning at 6:30 to Lone Grove Police. And there is a flurry, an absolute flurry of phone. There's a phone conversations between Jennifer Neff, Melissa Greenroyd, and Sabrina virtually all night, and especially right before she makes the phone call to Lone Grove and right after she makes the phone call to Lone Grove. Interestingly, if you look at Con's phone records, Con was occasionally returning Sabrina's texts and calls earlier in the evening, but once he got back to the house after he left where Molly and Colt were, he never returned anything to her. He never returned her texts. He never returned her calls. Absolutely no communication between the two of them after that. Everything was done between Jennifer Knipp and Con, Jennifer Knipp and Melissa, Melissa and Con. So you see that kind of separate snapshot of what was going on with the car and with Sabrina during that time period. And her father and I think her mother and daughter were involved in that too. During that time period. The other pattern that I picked up on that I kind of thought was sort of interesting was the pattern between Josh and Jessica. And I did have some questions when I came away with this, and Paulie, probably maybe you can recall this better, but if I remember correctly, one of the things that both Jessica and Josh said was that Colt called them while they were on a date about 2:00 the next day, July 8th. And what these phone records show is that Colt never called Josh ever during that entire period. There is not one phone call from Colt to Josh. Now, there are texts back and forth earlier in the night or the night before. There's a couple between the two of them. And then there's some, interestingly, rather early the following morning at 7:11 and between 7:10 and 7:13. There's 3 texts between them. But after, and there were texts between them the night before as well. But there's no phone calls the next day, and they don't communicate after 7:13 in the morning on the 8th. So why would Jessica and Josh both make that statement? I'm a little confused on that.
I'm not aware of Josh making that statement. I've never spoke to Josh personally. Jessica I have on several occasions, and she did tell me that on all occasions that her and Josh were at Two Frogs about 2:00 in the afternoon, and they got a call from Colt, and he was irate. He was cussing Molly, and he said, she's going to kick rocks when we get back home. That's not Jessica. That's not exactly how Jessica put it, but that's how I'm putting it, and that type of thing. But I would never been able to confirm that by the phone record that ever occurred.
There is no phone call from Colt to Josh ever in that time period.
The only thing that even remotely makes sense is he used somebody else's phone to call Josh. But it's highly unlikely. So,
I don't believe there's any phone calls from Molly's phone to him either.
No, there wasn't.
Right. So whose else's phone would he use?
Well, if in fact they made it back to the new property that morning, he could have been using Con's phone. But I don't know that. It's not on Con's phone records either, but so that doesn't really add up either.
Well, there are a lot of phone calls. Not a lot, but there's several phone calls to and from Josh from unknown numbers that I haven't been able to confirm whose they are yet.
Probably burner phones.
Probably, but usually I don't recall. I'm going to have to look at that, and I don't recall, but I do know that there were a lot of calls.
Well, I looked at all of this on my phone in the beginning, and now I've got it all printed out. What I thought I had all printed out, and I cannot find anything with the 8th on it, and it's really bothering me. Everything I printed has the 7th.
Yeah, it should start, if you look at the lines on, I don't know if it shows the line numbers on the Excel doc, the 8th starts at 4:41, and that's at 12:01 a.m.
Okay. So unless Colt used somebody else's phone, I don't know whose phone that could be, then there is no way that he made that call. Now, when you were checking the cell phone locations, was it always Kreiner Hills and Jimtown Tower? Was there ever another tower for Molly and Colt?
There was one, yes. There was only one location, and it was the very last. Was it the last? It was one of the last calls that Colt made. It was a different location than I had seen. And I even highlighted it. It was 9:54 a.m. on July 8th. Colt called Rob Nichols. It was 9:54 a.m. It was a call. It doesn't look like it's connected, but it shows different coordinates. And I don't know what those coordinates are. Although, let's see, are they the same as above? This is difficult for me because I'm constantly flipping these. AT&T is the only company that puts latitude and longitude opposite each other, and then the other companies. And then there's the 2 numbers in front of the longitude and latitude. Those numbers are identification purposes for the phone company.
Yeah.
And so this one just has the second number is different than the others for the same longitude and latitude. So I take that back. The placement was the same, but there's a different ID number in front there, and I don't know why that happened.
Are you talking about the last call for Colt?
Yes.
Yeah, it looks like it was the 7/8 at 8:04 a.m.
The one I'm looking at is 9:54 a.m.
9:54.
Mm-hmm.
I see it. Yeah. But just before that,
yeah, I see it.
There was a call between Rob to Colt at 8:03 a.m. and then there's another one at 9:54 a.m. But Colt calling Rob.
Right.
And that would have been after Rob went back, left the area. He was no longer in the area. He left the area. His records have been obtained, but I do not have access. I have not requested those yet.
Right.
On Rob Nichols. But he had left the area by the time Colt made that last phone call to him.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, there was another call that Tim Branch made to Colt a little later at 10:12 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
And what does M2M stand for on this documentary?
M2M, M2M means mobile to mobile.
Got
I
it.
think. And it's AT&T mobile to mobile.
Got it. Because there's quite a few calls between Tim Branch and Colt throughout these 2 days.
Right. And actually, Tim Branch is one of those calls that comes in. Tim Branch is the one. He's one of those calls. I said there was a flurry at 5:29 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
Tim's one of those as well.
So he was, after the police chase, the morning of the 8th.
Yep.
Colt was also calling Tim at that time.
Yep.
Okay. The other question I really had from all of this is the statement from Devon. There's a lot of calls with Devon early as well that morning, and
Devin.
And the statement from him that he picked them up and took them back to his house.
Mm-hmm.
I was reading the police report on that when he told the police that, and it stopped there. It was like, take that back. I'm not sure if it was police or if it was the PI. They don't go beyond that. Like, and did he have a broken ankle? Did you take him to the hospital? Where did they go? You'd think they would have charged their phones right away. All
Right.
of that is just hanging out there.
Right. Very bizarre.
And what's his relationship with? That's whose name that phone number's in.
That's a name I haven't heard before.
No, I don't know who that is.
No.
Who's that?
No, I don't either.
I don't either. It's actually handwritten on one of the original reports over that number. Her
Mhm.
that name is on there, but it's actually listed for Devon the rest of the time. But when I looked it up, it's registered to her name, and she's actually a PhD. I'm not a PhD, an MD.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, the interesting thing too is, like we were saying before, there's a lot of calls to Colt from this unidentified number. There's quite a few of them.
Right. Yeah, there's a few unidentified numbers I'd love to know,
Yeah.
because there were calls to them before the chase, and there were a lot of calls after, towards the end of the records. There were a lot of calls. And the other thing that I wish I knew, and I'm going to have to somehow, maybe Jackie knows, but I don't understand why I can see after the phones are dead, after both we assume Molly's and Colt's phones are dead, when calls are coming into them, I can see some of the numbers that are coming in, or some of the numbers that are coming in. And then there's a lot that I can't see. There's no incoming, but there's a recorded phone call coming in to that number. So
there's like a voicemail?
I don't know. There's no number identified, but some of them I can see, like when Josh and Jessica kept calling all day until the records ended. They kept calling both Colt and Molly's
Mhm.
phones.
Mm-hmm.
And I can see those, but there's so many I can't see. There's no incoming number listed. So I don't know if it's the type of call that's coming in that's preventing it, like if it's coming from a landline or an outside number. I don't know technically why that is. And maybe Jackie might know that. I don't know.
Yeah, I know he's done a deep dive on these phone records too. I don't know if he did what you did, a timeline. I'll have to check with him. This makes it very easy to kind of follow what happened as far as at least the phone traffic. So this is pretty amazing that you did this.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm not done yet, and I think but thank you. I mean, but it's something I have to do because I'm a very visual oriented person, and I have to be able to see it and map it and look at it. Going back and forth was driving me crazy.
Paula, are you able to pull up the 7-8 days? Or do you have those?
Yeah, I got them.
You got them now.
Yeah,
okay,
I'm
cool.
looking at 'em.
And like at first glance, those days, what stands out to you? I mean, like I'm seeing a lot of. I see a number associated with Rob Branch, Tim Branch. Yeah, it's a call between Rob.
Okay, so yeah, that was something when she was talking about that earlier. Tim Branch, the day before, according to his statement and according to the phone records, there was a lot of calls made back and forth between Tim Branch and Colt, right? And then the following morning, there's calls between Colt and Tim Branch, Colt and Rob Branch. And then recent story has it that Molly was picked up and taken to Rob Branch's house that morning after Colt had already been killed.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a theory that's being put out there right now with some evidence to it, according to them. So, and statements that Rob has made regarding that day. He's retracted some of the information that he told way back then. So that's kind of concerning to the investigators where that's concerned. The last people that they were trying to get in touch with, or they actually spoke with, more importantly, is what is concerning to me, or actually the way this phone spreadsheet is laid out, it's very hard. It's kind of hurting my heart a little bit.
Why is that?
Because I'm looking at it and then I see where it's highlighted and it says last activity from Molly. Then I see a little further down, I see last activity from Colt. And then after that, I see everybody that's trying to get in touch with them. And it's like, those people, Josh and Jessica, for starters, I mean, they were trying hard to get something back from Molly or Colt. It's kind of hard to look at knowing that, that something was going on at that moment and they were trying to get them help, and maybe they were trying to get out there to help them, but they didn't know where to go. I don't know. But that was something while she was talking, I was just scrolling through it and looking, and it was just kind of hard to look at. You know what I mean?
You're kind of replaying the events in your head and what you think might have happened.
Right. Because I do have a theory in mind as to what happened. And by looking at the phone records, I can play out that theory by these phone records.
And talk about that.
Yeah,
Tell
us what your theory is again, Paula, because it is important and there is a puzzle being put together by this document that Jodi has now made more clear for all of us. So let's hear what your thoughts are about that.
Well, with the locations, having the locations of the cell phones, and so having that laid out the way it is. And so I've always believed that after the 4 that were out searching for them left the area, then Con and Colby went back to where Molly and Colt were and brought them back. I knew the people that were out there that rode horses was, from my understanding, was Con and was Barry Bogan that was staying in the travel trailer at the end of Long Hollow Road. There was horse prints out there near the car. We know that Molly and Colt's cell phones pinged not far from the car the next morning, where their last phone calls were very close to that area, according to Hawk Analytics, who did the phone records, that thing. So, and I've always believed that there was an altercation out there, Molly and Colt, between Colt and somebody. I don't know who that other person is. There was an altercation and Colt was killed out there and Molly was brought back. So that's been my theory about those morning hours. And by looking at this, it kind of coincides with, in my mind, I'm trying to make it work,
No, I understand, but I think you have enough institutional knowledge about over the 10 years and looking at this the way it's laid out on a minute-by-minute basis with all the calls lined up. I tend to agree with you. It kind of plays out that way. But, obviously it's like we're only looking at half the story here. But based upon what we know on the theories and from what people have told you, Paula, the variety of people who've told you things, there is a nexus point that where everything kind of comes together. Now, like I said, there's a lot of calls here with Rob Branch and Colt Haynes, Tim Branch, those people.
According to the report of Tim Branch, Colt was the one selling drugs over there at the Branch residence on Bronco Road. And he was
selling it to Rob, maybe. He was selling it to them.
Well, that's according to what the statement says, yes. I find with these and the way it's laid out now, and I can look at the phone calls being made throughout the night And going back to Sabrina, for instance, and seeing all the calls that between her, Jennifer, and Melissa Greenroy during the night, when her statement clearly states that she went to bed around 10:30ish or whatever time that was on there, I don't recall. And then, when she woke up the next morning, her car was gone. Well, clearly that is not true. You can see that through these phone records that she was calling all night long. Well, when Jodi was talking about it, and when she made that call, it was, I believe, at 6:30 in the morning to Melissa Greenroy.
She called the police at 6:30.
Okay, so she had just spoke, I went to the preliminary hearing of Sabrina, and when Melissa Greenroy got up there to testify, she stated Sabrina called her and said, "Do I report the car stolen now?" And that's when, so I'm able to look at this and I'm able to see that, and it's pretty interesting to see it laid out in the way it's been
So wait a
laid out.
minute. So let me back up here a little bit. So the person who took the stand again?
Melissa Greenroy
And
Con's mother.
Con's mother at Sabrina's hearing.
Her preliminary hearing.
Preliminary
to determine
hearing.
if she was,
And
Yeah,
she basically
yeah.
said that Sabrina called Melissa to tell her, should I report the car stolen now?
correct.
Okay.
Right. And if you look down around 6:30, Jennifer Knipp calls Con,
Yes.
and then Con checks his voicemail. Then Jennifer calls him again, but then Sabrina calls Longgrove, reports the car stolen, and 3 minutes later she calls. Who does she call?
Jennifer.
Yep. So, I'm glad you're seeing that. I'm glad it's helping you see that, because I know it's tough to look at, but to me, it just shows you patterns of confirmation and conflict. So hopefully, if we can find some of these unknown numbers, it'll become even clearer.
And how do you find out the unknown numbers? How would you find out? What?
Well, I pay for a database that I use, but it's an open search. It isn't like I used to have access to. The police have, or even insurance companies have much more. They have better records that they can go back and get numbers that I probably can't. But
Okay.
For instance, when there's one time towards the end where Con calls and I say it's a number associated with Rob Branch.
Mm-hmm.
That I picked that up through my search database. So I picked up a number, and it would connect it to all the people that it knew that the database had records for, that number was ever used by. Rob Branch's name was one of them, but that's not the number that they were contacting him at through
Mm-hmm.
Kerry Walker. So that's how but that number was associated to Rob Branch. Another number that was very interesting to me was a number that was identified as going to Sabrina's father. That number was also associated at one time to Jennifer Knipp. So, so I pay for a database where I can check phone numbers. Sometimes I can get them and sometimes I can't. A lot of these, in fact, all of these that I have unknown by, I have several names associated with them, but I don't know who these people are. And I ran some of them.
How about this one? This one, it's right. It's a call on Molly's phone on 7/8 at 4:36 p.m. And you got 3 question marks, and it says no phone identified.
Oh, that's one of those. That's one of those numbers that came into her phone. There was a phone call recorded to her phone, but there was no number associated with it. There was no originating number listed on the report. And I don't know why.
Exactly.
That's interesting.
Right.
And I find this one that call at 6:25 a.m. for almost 2 minutes from Sabrina to the Knipp house landline.
Mhm.
I find that one fairly interesting. I mean, 2-minute call. Who was she speaking to at the Knipp house that morning at 6:25 a.m.?
Right.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting as well.
Yeah, and what's interesting is you can see the flurry of activity, the minute-by-minute flurry of activity as what we believe the events were taking place as far as their disappearance.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like you're seeing them, and I understand what you're saying, Paula, how it can make you emotional, how it's like they're fading away.
Mm-hmm. Well, yes. And, it's like, here is all of these people throughout the night making plans on what we're going to do, you know, trying to get a hold of Con, calling back and forth. Nobody can get Con on the phone, and they're making plans on what to do about the car. You know, why don't you call the police and tell them that, you know, the truth, and maybe Molly would be here today.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, you have two stories going on here. You have Molly's friends looking for her,
Yes.
and then you have the people either trying to mitigate or cover up
Yeah.
of what's going on,
Correct.
or they're trying to get their stories straight.
Right. Or they're trying to arrange things.
Exactly.
You know. Yeah. And even beforehand, before the chase starts, you see the flurry of phone calls going back a lot. There are some unidentified numbers too there. We can surmise what was going on there, you know, and then you can see that there's very little activity going on during the car chase, obviously, for obvious reasons. Although people were still trying, they were still calling, Sabrina was still calling Con. He was ignoring her as usual, and I can understand why, since he was in a high-speed chase.
In her car.
In her car, right. So you can, if you just take them block by block, you can kind of put those patterns together, and it's something that always helps me kind of paint a picture of what I'm.
No, it paints it. It's like I sit there. It's so easy to follow because you can start, you know, based upon what we all know on those events of those 2 days, which we all know that's the bullseye for us. Those 2 days. After all this time, after 10 years, after all the crazy theories and people's stories, the one thing that we always come back to, we come back to those moments, on the 7th and the 8th. And this kind of lays this out graphically, and you can see just by scrolling through it, you can almost, you know, hear kind of the stories and the voices of these calls as you're scrolling through. Like, what could they be saying? Could they be saying this? Could they be saying that? As we know from, as you just said, Paula, at the preliminary hearing, that call between Greenroyd and Sabrina, she was asking her should I call it in stolen? Why would she be calling her and asking her, why would she call her that? Say, should I call it in stolen? When she's 100% knew that Con had the car.
Right. But take it back, Rob. Take it back and remember the one chase that we highlighted where the one kid was with him and he started running from the police and he ran it into the woods and told the guy when he ran off, told the guy to report the car stolen.
Exactly. The previous kid. Yeah. Or was that previous or afterwards?
It was prior to,
yeah. The other car chase. Yeah.
Right. The one of them. And of course we know Rob, was, you know, she's the one that took the picture inside the stolen Mustang.
Yep.
Right. And he told Rob, remember where we left the Mustang, you know, so we know that they're involved not only in drugs, but they're involved in stolen cars. We also have connection where, you know, she's involved with, as under one name with one stolen car and with another name with another stolen car that Con was involved in. She went also by with 2 different dates of birth.
Got it.
But she was involved in the silver Mustang. She was the one who had possession of it when it was stolen. And then she's also one of the registered owners of, it was a different car that was stolen later and found damaged out in that area, out on Oswald.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's this, I don't know what to call it, but these people are involved in more than one thing.
Oh, no. I think that goes without a doubt. I mean, the level of small time petty larceny and car stealing out there was just, it ran rampant, and they knew they could get away with it, so they just kept on doing it. So that, like I said, that was the precursor to what led up to the chase with Molly and Colt and their unfortunate disappearance.
Right.
But at the same time, what I think is really interesting, and I don't know how we do this and who we can enlist to help us, is to try to find out where all these missing numbers are. How can we find those out, and who can we enlist us to help us to find those missing numbers?
I don't know if Jackie has access to anything.
We'll have to research. We may have to.
We'll have to research it.
Yeah.
Right.
I think those questions, all these question marks you have on this sheet, I think, and that, like, you know, like the ones with the one to Molly, to Colt, those are key to find out what those numbers are and who those phones belong to.
Exactly. And don't forget too, the one car that Molly was involved with Tanner. Tanner Skelton. You know, it's just so that could have gotten her in trouble with Con if she made him mad about that, or who knows? There's just, but you're right. We have to find out what those unknown numbers are, because those people have to be talked to. Even people like this or whatever his name was. Okay, so
And now we can see plainly that him and Con were texting back and forth, let's say the 7 o'clock hour of the morning of the 8th.
Right. He was a few of those texts in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about what you did, Jodi, is, and I'm sitting there scrolling because I keep on going back and forth, going up and down, trying to see patterns just like you were. There's not, and in those 2 days, there's not a minute that doesn't go by where there's communication going on.
Right.
It's like nonstop. Like it starts at 7:01 p.m. on the 7th, and then it goes almost every minute all the way to the bottom of the sheet where it's the next day. Keeps on going. There's no gaps in communication over a 24-hour period of time.
Right.
Literally all the way. Let me go back to the bottom here.
426, I think.
426. No, 459.
459.
459.
Yeah.
It's the identified. There's a flurry of calls to Colt. There's 4 calls to Colt from this unidentified number, 1 to Molly from the identified number, and then 3 more to Colt. And they're like minute by minute. So it's like they're having a minute conversation, and they hang up and they call back. A minute conversation, they come back. The only thing I can think of that is that they're trying to call and they're getting disconnected, or it's not connecting. But it looks like it's fascinating what you did, because it just paints a really interesting picture on the level of activity in that area and all these names that we've heard before.
Yeah,
so,
it helps
actually,
me. And
the last activity on there that you're referring to are all text messages from the unidentified number.
Interesting.
Yeah. Like if we could get a hold of the conversations
right.
in these phone records, in these text messages, that would be amazing.
Yeah.
But we may be well past that point.
Yeah, AT&T holds the records the longest of any of the companies from what I've researched. But I think generally it's 7, maybe you might get up to 10 years, but we're right at that border.
Right. Definitely something we would need to check into.
When you said earlier there was a phone number that belonged to an MD, a doctor, whose phone was that on? Devin Johnson.
Yes.
Devin Johnson called a doctor.
That phone number that was identified as his phone number is actually registered to a doctor. Is her name.
And Devin, Paula, explain his relationship to this whole situation so people understand who he is.
Well, he was a very good friend of Colt Haynes, and he was one of the 4 who went out looking for Molly and Colt the following morning. One person that never gets brought up in this is Kobe Turner. He's mentioned in these phone records as Colt trying to call him, but he was one of the 4 in that car when they went out there looking for them. And when they went to Rob, Devin, Bonita, and Kobe Turner. And so, interestingly enough, and just shortly after this all took place, he moved out of state. There was questions about that, people bringing up things about that. But I know nothing about this guy. But he was one of the ones in the car. But Devin was just a very good friend to Cole.
Yeah.
And he did spend a lot of time that morning out looking for him.
Well, I can understand anybody associated with this, and if they were a friend of Colt's, and they may, even if they didn't see what happened to him, if they kind of heard what possibly happened to him, I would get out of Dodge. I would get out of Dodge too.
Yeah. Well, the association with this is, any association with this would put a black stain on you, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
So.
Well, especially if you didn't, either you knew who did it or you didn't know who did it. And if you're associated with Colt, if you're a friend of him, do you really want to take that gamble? Because it was, as we all know, that area was, during that time, there was a lot of activity going on. As we can see from the phone records, there's a lot of activity. But what was not happening on the phone, there was, based on all of the statements you've procured, Paula, and in police statements, there was a lot of activity going on there. Even down to where, that the photograph and the videotapes of that well, that surveillance stuff, around the same time all this stuff is happening. There's so much stuff going on. Way too much activity to be happening in that area at those times at night.
Paula, do you believe that Devin picked him up? Did he ever recant it?
Yeah, he said he never picked them up. Yeah, he said he did not pick them up. Now, here's what I think could be a confusion in all of that. Because on Bonita's statement, she states that they picked up Molly and Colt on the 6th, and they went to a party at Rob Branch's house.
Okay.
I'm wondering if there was some confusion in that time frame. Also, we know for a fact that, and we just recently learned this, we know that Molly and Colt actually spent the night at Rob Branch's house that night. And that's just a very the night of the 6th, the early morning hours of the 7th. Yes. Mm-hmm. And then was picked up the next morning by Con. So that's just something very recent that we've learned. So I'm thinking that maybe that could be some confusion.
That would make sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I was very confused about that. It's like, oh my gosh. I mean, he supposedly had a broken leg. You don't mention take him to the hospital. It just dropped off. But I think that statement may come from Jessica. Was it I'm going to get him mixed up, but was it Jessica that said that?
Well, it was, but also Jessica's mother stated that. So Jessica actually heard that from her mother. And her mother told my cousin Misty that Devin told her he picked them up and took them to Ardmore. So what Jessica stated to me, she was repeating what her mother had told her.
And then where was Rob Branch's house?
That is in Carter County, Wilson, just south of Wilson.
Okay.
And one of the problems too is the information that I have the coordinates of all these calls. You can see almost all of them where there's call activity reported. Mm-hmm. We have the coordinates, but I can go into Google and I can put them in and it'll bring up a map for me, but I can't, there's no place I've been able to find that identifies what towers those are, what they're close to. I was just able to figure out which towers were which from the search warrant affidavit and bringing up the map on Google and putting in the coordinates so I could figure out which was the Jimtown Tower and which was the Griner Hills Tower. But there's many, many, many towers out there with all these other coordinates.
I don't imagine, like I said, there are probably more out there now than there were 10 years ago.
Oh, yes.
So,
many, many, many.
Well, Jodi, it sounds like you got something good going here. And
well, I hope so.
Yeah, and
it's amazing what the work that you've done on this, honestly.
And so, what's your next step with these phone records? What do you want to do next with these?
Well, I'd like to finish them completely, just so we have a complete record and picture. If the Bureau of Indian Affairs wants a copy, be glad. Please feel free to forward it. And they may have resources that I don't have at my, that I can access right now. That maybe they can find those unknown phone numbers. Those people should be talked to.
Okay.
Obviously, there's some interviews that should be redone of the people that were already spoken to, but those unknown numbers, those people all should be talked to.
I agree.
I think.
Oh, for sure. And I think the ones at the very last communications that we have through the text messaging, it was to Colt and Molly. Be very interested to know who that is.
Yeah.
Right. Now, there may be, Rob, that friend of mine, the PI that I told you about, there may be technology out there that can dive in deeper. I don't know. It's something we have to research, that maybe we can pinpoint or get records, get text messages. I don't know, but it's something I can check out here. But
yeah, well, you check out on your end. We'll check out on our end. We'll kind of tap into the resources we have, and we'll take it from there. But thank you so much for doing this, and Paula, thanks for jumping on and helping us navigate this. I'm sure after you look at it some more, Paula, you're going to have some more questions. So if we need to kind of circle back on this, please just let us know. But I think this gives us it's like a phone record roadmap right now. It's the first time, because we've seen these records in varying stages of analysis, and they used to make our head spin. This one you can actually really follow cleanly, and I think it really gives a chronological order of what's going on. The thing I'm still amazed at is that there's not a minute that goes by in those 2 days where there's not phone activity between all these people that we've been talking about over the past 10 months on this podcast. So it's very interesting, and hopefully it will help in this investigation, but it's an amazing amount of work and detail, and so glad to have you on board on our team there, Jodi, doing all this stuff.
Absolutely.
And
So glad to be there. So glad to be there.
Fantastic. All right.
Thank
Well, we'll
you.
check back. You good. Jodi, hit us up again after you get through all this stuff, and if we find out any information from some of the law enforcement contacts we have and how to try to track down these unidentified numbers, we'll let you know.
Great. Sounds good.
All right. Take care, ladies.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Next time on Partners in True Crime.
In the coming weeks, we have some exciting things happening. We have received dozens of requests from our audience to speak to the corruption in the county. We have heard dozens of stories of how people have suffered because of these abuses of power by elected officials.
We're going to be discussing some of these stories with locals and experts to help initiate some changes in the community. We're also going to create an open forum on the podcast.
We're going to have an episode that is completely interactive. We want to hear from you. What are your questions or thoughts on the case? What would you like to discuss with us? And do you have any information to share?
Please submit your questions or comments with your phone number on the website if you would like to be on the podcast or you would like us to discuss your question or comment.
You can submit this information confidentially directly on the podcast at the bottom of the first page where it says contact.
We look forward to hearing from you.
Partners in True Crime is launching an exciting new podcast, The Killing Hour with Doc Bond. Famous criminologist and author Dr. Scott Bond will be joining Rob and I on a deep dive into true crime and serial killers. It'll be an exploration into the mind of one of the world's most notorious serial killers, Dennis Rader, aka BTK.
We will be joined by special guests featuring BTK's daughter, BTK's prison guard, New York Times best-selling author and Emmy-winning filmmaker Mark Olshaker, the creator of Mindhunters, and more.
Join us every Wednesday as we investigate the sadistic, dark world of serial killers to understand what makes them tick. Learn the signs of these psychopaths who walk among us, because how well do you really know anyone?
If you have any information regarding the case, please contact the BIA at www.bia.gov/BIA/missing-murder-unit.
You can also call their hotline with tips at 1-833-560-2065 and email them directly at ojs_mmu@bia.gov.
And if you want to text them with a tip, text keyword BIA-MMU and send your tip to 847-411.
Check the Partners in True Crime website for this and any additional information.
If you or anyone you know is suffering from a methamphetamine addiction, please contact the American Meth Addiction Hotline.
If you or anyone you know has been the victim of sexual abuse, please contact the National Domestic Violence Hotline. All rights reserved. This has been a production of 722 Media Content. Please visit our website where you can subscribe to the podcast, find show notes, and listen to Vi's original song, Take Me Back, written for Molly Miller.